This is Ruth Proctor, the artist who's done the exhibition in the building at the moment, and my name's Kathy Noble, and I'm a curator at Tate Modern, and I work on performance and other types of project there. So me and Ruth are just going to have a bit of a conversation, probably for about half an hour or 45 minutes, and then I'll open up to the audience for questions. Just to say at that point, there'll be a roaming mic, so if you do have anything to ask, just wait for the mic. Okay. So maybe I'll start with your project here. I can imagine when you were invited to make work here, because there's no gallery space and there's no kind of specific situation, it must be tricky to navigate what you want to do. How did you approach it in the first place?
Well, I kind of came to visit the space and had a look around, and yeah, it was an unusual space because it's more of a used building. So I wanted to really kind of work with that and not really just display objects or just, you know, artworks that you would normally in a white cube sort of gallery space. So I wanted to kind of use my experience of being in the building and to make some kind of way of dealing with that. So I kind of worked on the ideas, and it ended up kind of becoming a kind of walk that I sort of did myself, but then I wanted to be able to sort of have the audience to have the experience of that as well. So it's kind of like a participatory piece that people can navigate the building, and it's not anything set, you know, exactly.
I'm not sure if you've all seen it. Do you want to just quickly explain? Because it's basically a series of interventions that take place throughout the building that may or may not be obvious to you, I think. If just your average person might not actually realise what's the art versus what's something that just exists in this building.
What's the real... Yeah, I wanted that to have that kind of crossover between something that's kind of could look like it's part of the building and then something that's more art orientated. So so the piece is a text that's by reception. So when you come in, you can pick it up, and it's a set of instructions that that aren't really like instructions as you'd get in a normal, you know, a game or something. They're kind of handwritten, so it's kind of maybe more the interpretation of what you're reading rather than instructions as a definite kind of idea of what to do. And then there are certain marks and certain kind of symbols around the space, around the building, that correspond to this text. So whilst you're walking around and reading, you can kind of respond to what it says and what's in the building in certain places, and then put items of clothing on if you wish or if you don't wish. So it's like an installation that's using the building and using the performer, which is you, the visitor, and then the objects and things placed around could be things found from the building. You know, like they have classes here for dance and for yoga, so I wanted to use objects that would have been normally found in this situation. So everything has that link to the building.
In a way, I think it's quite funny. I didn't do it because I'm far too lame. That you want to make the audience put the cape on when they enter, because you're kind of turning them into the performer, but making it very, very visible. Yeah, exactly. And the idea of the objects being visible and invisible, or the audience being visible or invisible.
I think I wanted that to kind of the way of having people sort of don costumes kind of makes them part of the space more than you would normally be if you were just kind of walking around to, I don't know, your dance class or just looking at the artwork. So you're part of the space, and making you more visibly, you know, like a character, something that's not really yourself. It's like almost like a superhero or a...
Where did the idea for the capes come from? Because they're very cartoon character.
Yeah. Well, they've come from various different places. One from a project last year I did in Colombia, where the capes are made from umbrellas. So they're kind of this sort of summery, you know, light-hearted kind of object that in Colombia, where I was staying for 3 months, they had them everywhere for the street sellers because it was so hot. So there was always this same umbrella. So I used the umbrellas that they had there as part of a piece that I that I did there. And so this piece is kind of a continuation of that, where it's not just me that was wearing a cape, it's the audience here. So they're all made from umbrellas, and trying to kind of give you some alter ego that you wouldn't normally allow yourself to sort of have, maybe. I mean, something more fun than just kind of like being yourself in the gallery space.
Because I guess the work here is called "I'll Be Your Mirror," right? And then on the second floor, is it on the second floor? You come into the kind of lobby area, and there's a TV that's there's a camera that's filming you.
On the first floor, I think. So it's kind of like your sort of character or your performance, as it were, reflected by my work as an artwork. So the TV screen's a kind of literal translation of that. So it's almost like it is a mirror, but it's almost projecting your new persona as a character on television, or I'm quite interested in, you know, television characters and film characters and kind of comedy-esque sort of personas, and how that can translate into the sort of making an artwork. So a lot of my works previously have looked at that in different ways, and titles usually suggest something like that, like one piece that's going around on this is called The Lone Ranger. So it's kind of that masked hero, character that it keeps repeating. And
because there's a series of masks in here as well, isn't there?
I think the mask is quite interesting because it has that you were saying, the visible, invisible. You can put it on and you can be it's masking your real identity and you're becoming something else. So it has this kind of not a barrier between a boundary between reality and non-reality, and the visible and the invisible.
Do you feel like the show was just kind of another layer on top of what already happens in the building then? Because it's a building with a function and you're inserting something into it in a kind of...
Yeah. I think the piece is, the whole show is kind of like this kind of layer. It's not anything that's going to suddenly grab your attention in a really kind of stop you in your tracks, but I like in the idea that it's something that can come and go whilst you're there. So yeah, it's kind of like a layer of the actions of the building, and people can take part or not take part, not notice it if they don't even, you know.
Do you think people do take part?
I think some people do. I haven't been here every day, but definitely I've heard like that people are taking part in their own sort of private way or as groups of people as well. So I mean, I'm not sure it as a whole. I think maybe the idea of participating is something that people find difficult with works in general. I mean, I'm not the best at it when it's somebody else's work. So, but I think.
But because you were kind of, I guess, invited to do something in a building that is a home for performance or choreography or all of those things, was it a very conscious choice to turn the audience into part of that?
Yeah, definitely. I think my show here couldn't have worked really without that connection. I think it was something that I've been thinking about in my work in general, and how there is this sort of difference between the work and the audience and the object, and how an object can be a performative thing or vice versa, and kind of these questions about how people look at work. So I think it was something that was naturally progressing, so it was kind of a good time to try it out, really.
Because often in a lot of your work you use found objects, and a lot of the things that I've seen that you've done kind of end up being quite specific, because the objects or the things come from the place or the scenario you're in. So with, I don't know, the sculpture that's in the hallway, which is I don't know what they use them for. What do they use them for? Yoga blocks.
I think they use them for supporting, I'm not really sure exactly, but supporting parts of the body, I suppose.
Oh, do you put them under your back?
Yeah, different places.
I don't know. I should do some exercise.
Different places.
Did you come in and then kind of decide what you were going to use at that point?
Actually, yeah, the yoga blocks, I saw some lying around one day when I visited the studios. So yeah, it was definitely things that I saw, and I saw potential in using as objects. And I work in that way with a lot of things.
I like the idea of kind of collecting the activity of a space or a place and then transforming that into something else.
Yeah, definitely. And the yoga mats in the tower, and I kind of like the fact that people, someone said on the first day, just before it was opening, oh, there's a yoga mat there, can they take it? And it's kind of that.
Did they take it?
No, I don't think so.
Are they fixed together?
Those ones are.
Okay.
The yoga blocks are kind of really wedged into the space. So
when it's over, will you give the yoga blocks back?
Well, they're my ones, so.
Oh, okay. I thought you'd stolen them.
No. I collected my own objects that kind of responded to the space.
Ah, okay, got it.
Because I thought that
they wouldn't give you them.
Well, they would need them, so.
Fair enough. Maybe it would be. Ruth recently did a residency in Cali. Is that how you say it?
Yeah, Cali.
In Colombia.
Yeah.
Which I can imagine. You've mostly lived in this country in London, haven't you?
Yeah, mostly in London and just in England in general. But,
and you were doing it. Which was the art space there you were doing it in?
Lugar Dudas.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and how long were you there for?
I was there for 3 months, so it was quite a big, big project. Well, not project, but a big time away from London.
But the kind of work you made there seems to have lots of relationships, as you said before, to what you're doing now.
Yeah, well, I think the experience of being there definitely changed my work in some way. It made it kind of more, in some ways, more performative with myself involved, and also because my work is quite site-specific in general. It just enabled me to develop ways of working with new things that obviously are completely different to what you're used to in London. So it took me out of my.
So what did you do while you were there?
I spent a lot of time walking and kind of seeing things, and I collected lots of images and lots of ideas really. And
were you living at the space, or were you living on your own?
Yeah, I was living in the space, which was an exhibition space, a sort of cultural centre really. They showed films and had talks and performances and exhibitions, and they had a library, so it was quite a busy social space, but it was kind of the one space in this city that was like that. There wasn't many other kind of art spaces around, so it was quite, even though it was very, very busy, it was quite sort of solitary in its sort of ideas. And so the rest of the city I felt quite sort of like I could do whatever I wanted, I could wander wherever I wanted, and even though it has a reputation for being quite dangerous, I kind of felt accepted by everyone just walking around. And
really?
Yeah.
So what did you make while you were there?
I made a sort of performance with the capes. This is where the capes came from originally, where I made a cape out of the umbrella that I found in the city, and then made a walk around the city wearing a kind of wig that kind of transformed me into maybe slightly more Colombian than a blonde and blue-eyed.
What colour's your wig?
Dark black, and it was really long. But it really made me stand out even more because I was wearing this cape, and so I was walking around, and it was kind of the reverse to how I originally imagined it. So it'd be this kind of just blending in, but blending out at the same time. So that was one piece where I documented that, and then I showed it at Hollybush Gardens as a slideshow. I made.
How did people react to you when you were walking around in your superhero cape?
They were really amazing. They were just shouting things like Superman and
really?
Kind of Batman at me, because they knew that I obviously wasn't Colombian, and they kind of just were happy that somebody was kind of doing something in the city that was a little bit out of the ordinary. But I think everything's out of the ordinary there, so you kind of.
In what way?
I think.
I've never been.
Yeah,
so.
I think it's just maybe that people are more outgoing than maybe here.
Culturally.
People are quite kind of culturally quiet, and on the street you wouldn't necessarily sort of talk to another person really. But I think they're much more kind of open to speaking to whoever they bump into, and kind of a much sort of more vocal sort of city really. And I made. They had a lot of like sort of things like rituals, not rituals, but things to do with luck and things to do with...
Because you made a series of posters, didn't you, that were to
that
do with
kind
chance?
that kind of went with this sort of the persona that I kind of created. There was a poster that said Super Ruda for luck and protection, and the character that I kind of made myself into was called Super Ruda. And you can see in these posters actually, and I had them posted around the city as if it was like an advert. This is the character kind of walking around. But the posters kind of advertised something that could be a product, but it wasn't really a product. It was just an idea, and then the luck and protection was something that could be, you know, it could be something characteristic of an object that people would, you know, hold, or people would have. They hang aloe vera behind their doors
Really?
for like luck, for bringing wealth, and you know, they had a lot of different sort of superstition things that I was quite interested in. So I played with that in the work that I made. So I made posters and this character, and also a film. So the film that I made there was more of like a performance that wasn't a performance. It was there's no one in the film, but it was a space that I kind of got my way into quite sort
the
of luckily.
stadium.
Yeah.
So was it an ex kind of sports stadium?
Well, it was a bull ring.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh wow. But it's not used anymore.
It's used, but it was
But
only
not
at
for
one time of the year, I think. So
Okay.
it's closed the rest of the time, and there was just security guards at the gate, and only by chance the kind of was allowed in. So I think a lot of the things that I made there were just by chance and by sort of luck.
In the same way that you kind of made the show here, it feels very, I don't know, like you're making work that's visible and invisible at the same time. And either, I don't know, I mean, I guess there you're the performer versus the audience being the performer here.
Yeah. I think
But it's really site-specific too.
Yeah, but it's definitely working out that way, that each place that I make a piece of work at has a real influence on the show, or the work that I'm making.
In terms of the objects you use and in terms of
and
behaviour.
Definitely, and also then chance. I'm quite interested in this idea of chance being kind of an important factor that brings things that you couldn't plan into the sort of work. So like if you find one object, or if you find some kind of something happens, like a film that I made quite a long time ago now. It was when it snowed in England, and I suddenly kind of rushed out with my cameras and filmed part of a section to the film, but that wouldn't have happened if it hadn't have snowed that day. So it's kind of leaving myself open to these kind of things that could be part of the work. So I'm not designing something kind of in advance. I'm quite interested in, you know, time and place having an impact on the work.
Because you recently spent some time in Turin, didn't you?
Yeah, in January this year I made a show at Norma Mangione Gallery, and
there's a video downstairs that was part of this, which is, well, you can explain it better than I can, but it involved, Ruth ice skating. Yeah, so, well, I used to be an ice skater. So the reason why this piece was kind of made was because someone said to me, oh, there's an ice rink in the city outdoors, and bring your skates and we should go skating. And then I was there for a month, and I kept walking past this ice rink every day, and my skates were just in my room, and I just kept thinking, oh, it's such a nice kind of space. It was like a page of a drawing or a stage. And so I kept on thinking about it, and eventually I kind of thought, well, I'm just going to break in the morning early and document my actions. And I kind of planned a little kind of routine that wasn't, you know, it's just some ideas of drawing shapes on the ice. And I thought, well, to add to the idea, this is, you can see the picture, I wear a mask, so it's kind of really tongue-in-cheek, so it's a bit like I'm a burglar, or, you know, it's not really illegal, but I'm not asking permission, so just climb over the barrier and break in. Using a public space in an illicit way.
And I did it 3 times, so I thinking that I'd do the same actions 3 times and then they'd at dawn. So at the same time, the kind of rules where it was at the same time for 3 days, and I'd try and do the same actions, and then I'd see what came out of that. So I put the camera in the same place each day, and didn't tell anyone I was doing it. I just kind of wanted to see what happened, really.
Earlier you were saying it was because you were interested in the idea of repetition, but how repetition, you know, no performance, it doesn't even matter if it's scripted or any other thing, is ever the same thing.
Exactly.
It's always something, there's always something slightly different in it being reformed, and the kind of error really that occurs.
Yeah, definitely the errors that, because having the 3 videos next to each other, you can see they're totally different, but the idea was kind of to try and do something similar the same each time. And it's kind of the same as the photographs that are in this show downstairs, which are repeating an action 3 times, and they're photo booth pictures, so they kind of have 4 different images each time, and if you try and do the same actions, even if you really, really practice, there's always something slightly out of alignment or different to the last, time you've done it. So this kind of rehearsal and repetition of movement or of an idea, and the errors that kind of are highlighted by repeating it a certain amount of times, that's something that I'm really kind of working on with my work at the moment. So it's kind of...
But I always think through repetition you'll get some kind of perfection, but you never do, because something clunky happens in the end.
Exactly.
Or your body fails you.
Well, I mean, that's because I said I used to be an ice skater. That's how, like, training for skating used to be. I mean, dancers will have the same thing. Like, sometimes your body just feels different, or something's different. So even no matter how much you practice, there's always the element of it being completely, Failure. Yeah, exactly. Failure is it's an interesting idea with that, I think. Trying to attain perfection, but in fact, the more interesting part of it for me is that you can't really ever find that. So.
Well, when something live or it involves a human being, it can't ever be the same again.
No,
Do you think you're ice skating then and having that? I don't know, because I did gymnastics when I was younger, like in quite a hardcore way, but that still travels through in the way I see things, or the way I do things, or the way I relate to things physically.
Yeah.
Do you think that comes through in some of your work, in that often you're always present in the work, or there's kind of some sense of your physical relationship to objects in it?
Definitely. I think it's had without realising it, it had a definite impact on how I dealt with space as a place for objects, for the body. So it's kind of, it has had even the page of a drawing, I think I have this relation to space that has come from my experience of skating for maybe 15 years. So it was kind of really part of the way I saw things. So and how you project an idea from something, on a stage to something far away, or I guess
it must have really informed your relationship to learned forms of movement as well, though.
Yeah, definitely. A repetition of practice and how gesture. And
have you ever worked with actual dancers then? Because you did a performance at Gasworks. I can't remember when.
It's quite a while ago, 2008. I think.
Do you want to just describe that?
So that was a piece that involved 4 dancers, but they weren't really professional dancers. They were just friends that I asked to be involved, and it was in relation to a film I'd previously made, which was a 2-screen projection where the same film was projected in mirror image of the other. So there was this kind of, even though the films didn't match up exactly, it was the same image in repetition. So that was kind of where this thing of, like, maybe mirroring and repetition and kind of all those ideas that I'd started coming from. But the performance was a live version of that. So it was, even though it wasn't the same movements, it was the same ideas. So the mirror image of 2 performers and the other 2 performers. So and how in a live situation that brings out sort of more questions really about movement and about mirroring
I want to find the picture of it on here, because the costumes you dressed the people in, it felt like it harked back to a certain kinds of modernism, or kind of like, I don't know, when you think of images of Bauhaus ballets and these kind of very constructed geometric figures.
I think that's...
was that a very specific thing you chose to do?
Definitely.
If I get to the picture, I'm going to stop it, if you can see. Anyway, sorry, go on.
Yeah, well, it was definitely looking at that kind of, that way of working and referencing that within the work. So it had this definitely strong kind of almost mirroring of a modernist, like the Oscar Slammer, or you know, people like that. Yeah. So it was very, very kind of it was very clear in my mind that that's what I was kind of working with. So so the costumes were making the performers into some kind of sculptural work, that they weren't just dancers or people on stage making movements. They were kind of maybe sculptures in themselves, or vice versa. You know, the set was kind of they were part of the whole piece. So it wasn't, you know, like the set and the performers kind of mingled together.
A relationship between the objects and the humans.
Yeah.
In most of the shows I've seen of yours, there's always a kind of choreography of objects, and in the older ones it seemed to be something that was very, very theatrical.
Yeah, I think that's something that I'm moving away from slightly, but then there's still that sense of choreographing, but maybe it's not so theatrical.
And in the kind of early things I've seen of yours, it felt like you were making quite conscious references to, I guess, quite specific historical things.
Definitely.
Whereas the later things seem a lot more, I don't know, you.
Well, they are.
Current.
But then I'm still referencing things, I think, but maybe like in a slightly more...
less conscious way.
Yeah, less conscious.
Where you don't know the viewer to necessarily want to know,
what it is. Yeah. Like before I was referencing...
that's it, but you can't really see it. I'm sorry about the problem.
There was lots, in this piece, there was lots of referencing like constructivism and modernism, and also kind of going back to like stances from Greek sculptures and, you know, Greek statues, that like the typical athlete's pose, you know, of the discus thrower, and kind of referencing lots of artworks in that way. Whereas,
what drew you to all of that? Because I mean, so much art production today seems based upon this model of don't get angry with me, a need to kind of form or validate something through linking it back to the past. And I think I meet loads and loads of people who very, very consciously do that. So when you read a press release or something, there's this kind of list of all the things that they believe are important.
Yeah.
And actually, I think to the person experienced the artwork, you don't need that list of stuff. And I just wonder sometimes what draws you into those references in the first place.
Well, I think it's to start with, it's a kind of interest in the way that the things that I'm interested in are referenced in works like that. So the constructivism or the Greek sculptures, they have this kind of something that I'm definitely...
A kind of formal sense that you're interested in.
Yeah, definitely. And then you bring your own kind of other ideas to that. So I think that was the way I was working then with those kind of very literal references. But I think now maybe more I'm looking a lot at... I look at a lot of artworks whilst I'm making things, but now I think it is definitely more part of my experience in the kind of present moment.
Yeah.
So that's where there's like kind of slight difference in where my work's been going recently. But like the capes, they're a kind of reference to Helioitica. And
oh yeah, of course.
But like they're not really, because when I was in Colombia, I was really looking at a lot of South American art because I was in South America, so it was the thing to do really. And
in a way it's more interesting because it's just the kind of found object.
Yeah, exactly. So it wasn't really referencing that, but it was kind of, but I'm aware of that his
oh yeah, of
capes
course.
and so it was kind of my work, but then I'm aware of the other things that have these connections rather than the other way around, where it's kind of referencing things and then it's mine after.
Rather than taking a reference as a kind of ready-made to then use or something. I don't know, it confuses me. So would you like to work with actual dancers? Yeah,
definitely. I think it would be a really interesting way of working with my work, because I'm not a choreographer and I don't have the things that maybe a real, a choreographer would speak about or kind of how they would work. So I think it would be an interesting way. I think up until now I've used people that I know just because it's kind of, that's the tools I have, like, you know. But I think it would be interesting to see what happens in a more, it'd be more of a formal way of working somehow, maybe with real professional dancers, or even if it was something else that was, you know, had actors, or I think it would change the work again. But I think
because you don't seem to work with movement or any form of choreography as a form of language.
No.
Which it is in so many ways. You seem to approach people in a kind of more, I don't know, sculptural sense, or blending them into a situation or something that you want to create. Yeah,
exactly. I think that would be the difference with, you know, working with someone that is used to having this kind of language of movement, whereas mine would be, slightly more removed from that. So
maybe you just need to make an enormous performance on an ice skating rink.
Yeah.
With some capes.
With some capes, yeah.
Anyway.
I'm doing a performance in 2 weeks, actually, so that's going to be quite interesting.
What are you doing for that?
It's going to be more of not a performance where you'd sit down and watch it like a theatrical kind of, like we are here with the audience sitting down watching. It's going to be more like an exhibition as such, like an installation.
Okay.
And it's going to be in Loughborough University, which is kind of a really sporting university. They have all these kind of like
it really is.
Yeah. The British athletics team train there, and they have all these ginormous spaces for training. So I'm using one of the sporting spaces as the sort of setting for the piece. And then
which space? A gymnasium?
No, it's like an indoor shot put space.
Wow.
But it has these nice lines on formal space. It kind of has a linear quality. It has the lines on the floor, and so there's kind of a boundary to where the performance can be. And I'm going to use kind of objects from the space as kind of the staging. So and then the people that will be performing in it will be kind of rehearsing at the same time as.
Who are the people in it?
Just friends again.
So, okay.
Yeah.
There's always a really formal quality to the way you stage things or set up galleries in terms of spacing and geometry, and even in the, I don't know, objects you use. There's always a very specific aesthetic in terms of colour.
Yeah.
That seems really, really, really formal and quite against, I don't know, the kind of spontaneity of the work or something.
I think that's something I've consciously tried to kind of have alongside the spontaneous kind of element and the chaotic element, because then it really kind of, even though there's a big process behind things and it's quite chaotic, then the final thing is quite minimal in some ways, and the colours and the things all have a relation specifically to the objects or to they're not kind of decorated in such, you know, like some things are painted, but then the purpose of the painting is to do with the kind of geometrical forms or the ideas that I've been working with. So I think I'm I restrict that side of things because the other side of things can be quite chaotic. And so I think from making my work and learning about my work in the sort of, you know, my last 6 years of making, I think that's my way of kind of putting some kind of
structure or frame around the ideas.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So
it's getting very hot here next to the projector. It's making me really, Anyway, so does anyone, I was thinking maybe we should ask if anyone has any questions or comments or anything, or if not, don't worry, that's okay too. I understand.
Anything? No?
I was curious to talk a bit more about why you're drawn to
There's
sport.
a mic.
Oh, yes. I was curious to know about a bit more about how you're drawn to sport, because it seems like a fairly recent, something that's recently come into your practice, looking at the dates and the images on the screen.
Well, actually, it's kind of not a recent thing, but I think maybe it's being more obviously referenced now. rather than the artwork side of things maybe. But I've always been interested in that kind of idea of sport being a spectacle and a kind of theatrical event rather than just some kind of game of skill or, you know, like football, that it's kind of like an amphitheatre of today's kind of, you know.
Just wait for the Olympics.
Yeah, exactly.
It's one of the biggest spectacles ever. I'm sure we'll screw up the opening ceremony though. Anyway, sorry, go on.
They should let me do it instead.
I want to do it.
So I think it's always been there, but and also because of my background as an ice skater, it's been there in a more, so maybe sort of just underlying way, you know. And my films, a few of my films have spaces of sporting kind of reference in, like the gymnasium floors with lines and things. So
I think when you've done that kind of thing, like ice skating or dance or gymnastics or anything that involves your body, you kind of can't ever leave it.
Yeah, you can't
like,
get away from it.
I can't quite get rid of gymnastics in my life.
Yeah, it's true. I think it's...
Because it heightens your awareness of things that you wouldn't otherwise be aware of.
Definitely. So yeah, even though I think it has always been there, even though it's not always very obvious. But does that answer your question? Yeah. So, anyone else?
Okay, well, thank you very much for coming. And yes, I think, oh yeah, I forgot to tell you that there's a bar downstairs if anyone wants drinks afterwards. Otherwise, yes, thank you.
And if anyone thinks of any questions, you can always ask.
You can come and talk to her afterwards.
Sorry.